We have entered a truly wild moment in world history, and bizarrely it's personified by this specific man. That's right, Elon Musk. He revealed that he'd spoken personally to Vladimir Putin about the war in Ukraine, after which he was inclined to shut down Ukraine's use of his Starlink satellite network, which was providing essential internet connectivity for them. Now, Musk has raging fans. He has raging haters. As always on this channel, I am neither of those things. I look for the insights that are often invisible to both the fans and the haters. I think there are some particularly important ones here. Because whether Musk actually spoke to Putin or not, he later retracted the claim, this should be a cold water to the face moment. Because for all the entertaining theatrics that came before, it was possible to ignore, at least up to a point, the massive transfer of power that's been slowly taking place over the last couple of decades. But now it's time to stare this in the face and just double check whether we think this is leading us to a place that we want to go. Seriously, it's a big deal. Let's jump in. First, it's worth noting there's nothing new in the uber-rich business elite involving themselves in affairs of state and global politics. JP Morgan Jr. was one case in point. The dominating force in American banking, Morgan played a major part in financing World War I through a series of loans to the Allies. Starting with a $12 million loan to Russia, that counted as real money in 1914, of course, and then followed by a loan of $500 million to the British and the French. By 1917, when the Germans' devastating deployment of U-boats was making it look like they were going to inevitably win the war, and those profitable financial arrangements would consequently go bad, Morgan was suspected by some to be conspiring to bring America into that war. And once the USA did indeed enter the war, JP Morgan became a close collaborator. Once the war was ended, one of the Morgan family of companies managed Germany's reparation payments, and so on. Now, this was remarkable, but it followed a straightforward script of powerful private interests dealing adeptly with governments in a way that served their bottom line self-interest. Powerful, playing a part in the shaping of great events for sure, but largely acting as an enabler for people that we know are kind of supposed to be in charge, the agents of the state, relatively sober and sensible, in other words, for all that you may choose to disapprove of them for a host of potential reasons. It's easy in those cases to ignore the very real questions about unaccountable power because the accountability mechanism's not so very far away. That is not a description of what we're seeing recently. It's not just Elon Musk, but Musk is certainly pushing hard and fast into areas that mean it's impossible to ignore what's going on. Suddenly, we have a man who is engaging in big public interest questions. At a time when other motor manufacturers were following what their customers wanted, he pushed Tesla into the bigger mission of bringing forward the age of clean energy. And there's no doubt that Tesla's actions successfully impacted the expectations on the whole sector. At a time when NASA's space exploration had become drained of ambition, and it had become known mostly for its slow bureaucracy and high costs, he created a fast-moving, lower-cost route to higher ambitions in space, something that had previously been the preserve of national governments. And on the back of that momentum, he filled the sky with satellites, making it possible to provide internet services to anywhere in the world, but at the cost of filling up a finite orbital space in an opportunistic spirit just because he could. Of course, most recently he's annoyed some and delighted others by taking over one of the internet platforms that comprises the digital public square, the rules of engagement for which have been points of huge contention for various reasons across the world. Where JP Morgan was content to have his businesses profit from the actions of governments, seeking to manage those actions to best advantage where there was leeway to do so, Musk is into full-on save the world mode. And if that's asking too much, at least change the world mode. And if that's out of reach, then at least scandalise and shock the world mode, preferably all three at the same time. The thing is, his actions, whether you love them or loathe them, have certainly not been sober and restrained. He's been capricious, he's been bizarrely random and unserious. He can step in when there's a crisis with important and valuable support, yes, and at times he can intervene in ways that seem somewhat less helpful because of something that maybe crossed his mind that very day. Suddenly you begin to notice, if all these guys do is make products, like Tesla makes cars, then they remain accountable, in theory at least, to the customer in the marketplace, as well as to regulators within that business sector, wherever they sell those products. But when you're providing global internet services via satellite, and you can decide on a whim to provide that to war-torn Ukraine, and you can chat to the person who invaded their country and perhaps then decide on a whim to withdraw that support, you begin to notice, hold on a minute, this guy has real power. When SpaceX temporarily withdrew satellite connectivity close to some of the Russian-occupied parts of Ukraine, the consequences were reportedly that some Ukrainian soldiers died for the unexpected absence of those communications. As he started firing out his own ideas on how Ukraine should give up territory in return for peace, ideas that Ukraine felt obliged to respond to and rebut, you begin to ask, how is Musk accountable for how he uses this power? Bear in mind, the launch of his Starlink satellites may have been licensed by authorities in the US, but their terms of reference for doing so didn't extend to how they might get used to influence world affairs. No government chose to give Musk that power. He simply exploited a governance gap to make the most of an opportunity. Now, he didn't do so thinking this would lead him to become interfering in the outcome of wars. There's no evidence that's the sort of power he actually wanted in the slightest. But once you have power, it's remarkable the step-by-step evolution that it can undertake and the new appetites for using it that can gradually develop. Let's just take a moment to reflect on how we got here. Really, it's all because of the internet. That phenomenon that grew relatively quietly during the 1990s, the hiding place for nerds and geeks and dreamers, largely derided as they were by everyone else as something marginal to real life. And then a remarkable period when, as the technology improved, suddenly it became obvious that all sorts of inefficient processes in every business and consumer sector could be transformed pretty much beyond recognition by being pushed online. Suddenly you had tech innovators reinventing whole industries, others swarming over the industries that hadn't yet been reinvented, trying to work out whether they could be the first to do so and what was needed to make that happen. Moving money safely online was the first big step. Musk was in there early with his initial internet bank, which then merged with Peter Thiel's company to become PayPal. And this all set the mindset. The internet was here and it was gonna change everything. Sleepy old politicians who didn't know what a mouse was, they had no hope of understanding it, let alone regulating it. New companies like Amazon were due to dominate the world. All the old bricks and mortars companies would be left behind. Some of them were, some of them caught up. And this was all going to benefit us all, because everything would work more efficiently, services would become possible that couldn't have previously been imagined, all driven by these tech whiz kids. And part of the giddiness of it all was just how fast these companies could move. The big old bureaucracies would plod along, being scared of too much change to the system that sustained them. But these new guys, well, they had a culture of moving fast and breaking stuff. Get a proof of concept out there fast, then improve it. Be loud and disruptive. That was how to be successful. It was all heady stuff. This was arguably how the world got lulled into this situation where individual entrepreneurs started to move into redefining public interest goods. And mostly it was a good thing, because they weren't wrong. Most of those processes were massively improved by being moved online. The ability to speak instantly to people across the world at next to zero cost, to move money across the world in the blink of an eye, to give people massive choice via a website that meant they could find what they needed in seconds, not hours or days. All of that was good. The types of people who used to laugh at the nerds are now the ones who are addicted to Instagram and TikTok when they're not shopping online. And the world-changing impact of rapid technological development continues. But now it's taking us to some places where the grey areas are rather more visible. Now we're in a world where private companies across the world are developing artificial intelligence. Will it be the next bold leap to higher value-added services in ways we can only imagine? Or, will it destroy humanity? That's a pretty big range. Who's overseeing that rather important responsibility? Well, Elon Musk has taken an interest, was involved early on in OpenAI, has just launched a new startup, XAI, and has been highly engaged in the debate over it. So that's a thing. We are also in a world where our ability to monitor what's happening in the brain is advancing fast. So soon we'll be able to have you move your computer cursor with your mind. Maybe have your computer type words you simply think. And all that sounds pretty cool. Oh, and once you've hooked up to one of those machines, just maybe we'll be able to tell all sorts of things about you, including your least socially acceptable beliefs, opinions and practices. The ultimate end of privacy. Again, seems a rather important line we're potentially crossing. Who's in charge of the moral grey area in that case? Well, not to worry. Elon Musk's company Neuralink is well advanced in trialling devices that get implanted on your brain via a hole drilled in your skull, where all sorts of things might be possible. Is Musk's ubiquity in all of this an indicator of something nefarious? Well, not by intent, no. You just have an intellectually driven, compulsive individual who is fascinated by the perimeter of what the human race can currently achieve and egotistical enough to deeply want to be the causal factor in advancing it. In many ways, you should probably be more wary of those involved in those areas who are below the radar, whose names you've never heard of. Public figures do at least attract a degree of scrutiny as a cost of their desire for fame. But the other aspect of Musk that feeds into this discussion is his apparent need to be at the centre of solving every crisis. So, for instance, in 2016, South Australia was hit by a near-total blackout after a major storm. Musk dived in and said Tesla's battery technology could provide a 100 megawatt power backup station and do so quickly. He was pushed as to whether he was serious. He tweeted back, "Tesla will get the system installed and working 100 days from contract signature or it is free." They took him up on it. Tesla did it within 60 days. Masses of positive publicity. Elon saves the day. Indeed, by 2020, you were seeing stories like this. Undeniable success. This station was stabilising the local grid, making it work so much better with intermittent wind power, for instance. Interestingly, there is a passing comment in this particular puff piece that, in retrospect, is highly relevant. And it says this: "We can argue about whether or not private citizens should have to rely on a billionaire angel investor to get a steady supply of power. But the but is, well, it worked, so we're not going to ask too many hard questions." A year later, by the way, the Australian government has had less positive experiences with the company that's running the site, Neon. Even though, as far as I could tell, that isn't relating to any problem with the underlying technology as provided by Tesla, but worth just noting. Elon Musk got less positive press when a group of boys in Thailand got stuck in a cave and he projected that maybe his engineers could construct a tiny kid-sized submarine to be used in the rescue. That incident's now remembered as having been dismissed as a PR stunt by one British caver, who was then labelled a pedo guy by Musk, a description that then landed him in court for libel. But you get the idea. Elon and his amazing technological unicorn riding to the rescue when the crisis hits. So, of course, SpaceX offered the use of its satellites to Ukraine soon after the invasion started. And, of course, Musk hadn't fully considered all the implications that act was going to have on him. Russia being an ally of China, for instance, China being an area where he does a lot of business. But that being said, the US government became painfully aware that it had few mechanisms to hold Musk to account on his interventions in the Ukraine war. Having offered to make his services indispensable to Ukraine, the US Undersecretary of Defense Colin Kahl noted that he could only talk to Musk with care and diplomacy, as if dealing with a notoriously fragile head of state for a strategically important country. He said this: "Even though Musk is not technically a diplomat or a statesman, I felt it was important to treat him as such, given the influence he had on this issue." Because it was clear he could just decide on a whim to do something that would have serious consequences on the battlefield, and they had no way to stop him from doing it, except reasoning, bargaining, flattery, and so on. So when Musk was at the Aspen conference and he said, "We should be negotiating. Putin wants peace. We should be negotiating peace with Putin," following it up a week later by tweeting his own peace plan, he didn't say at that point what he later said, that he'd been speaking directly to Putin. But Reid Hoffman, who helped start PayPal, said that his former colleague seemed to have, quote, "bought what Putin was selling, hook, line and sinker." President Zelensky, unsurprisingly, responded strongly on Twitter. But it's worth noting, Elon Musk has 20 times as many followers as the Ukrainian president. This is apparently the soft power of our day, and it is overwhelmingly not in the hands of democratic processes. One of the ironies of all of this is that Elon Musk is a huge critic of the World Economic Forum at Davos. Indeed, he savaged it earlier this year by tweeting, "How is WEF/Davos even a thing? Are they trying to be the boss of Earth?" And that plays well with his current fan base, the ones who applauded him for taking over Twitter in the name of free speech and anti-wokery. And the fact that the left now hates him makes them love him even more. But the phenomenon of Musk is arguably the epitome of what the World Economic Forum really represents, if you ignore the wild conspiracist versions. The idea that the brightest billionaires in the room can sit down together and come up with solutions to the world's problems. That is absolutely the vision of Davos. Now, the fact that Musk doesn't play well with others, wants to do it all on his own, that's kind of not the part of that vision that most needed fixing. The genuine reason to question some of what comes out of Davos is the one that goes, where is the accountability? So there are some smart billionaires in the room. Such people also have huge egos that are prone to self-delusion that they have answers to problems, the complexity of which they have barely begun to understand. From Margaland to the more extreme left, distrust of globalist technocracy is one of the few things those extremes have in common. And yet Musk, who spread his satellites around the world, whose business interests have him fated by the elected leaders of France and Germany and the UK and the unelected leaders of China, amongst others, he is the epitome of the idea that a globalist mindset allied to breakthrough technology is the overpowering force to solve many of the world's problems. Just because he's charismatic and anti-woke and all those other things that anti-globalists like. The question is still the same one. Where's the accountability? If you hate George Soros having influence or Bill Gates having influence, isn't it the mechanism of unaccountable power that is the problem, rather than your opinion of the specific individuals themselves? It's not that the WEF is going to roll its tanks out across the world and take over your country. It's that the same individuals who developed a taste for taking bold action, moving fast and breaking stuff, are opportunistically taking advantage of governance gaps. Not because they're nefarious, but because they can. New boundaries unexplored, where if you move fast, before governments have been able to regulate, you can claim ownership of the space. And then, quite often, those governments find they have to negotiate with you, having lost the power to dictate to you. Now look, governments can be terrible. So there will be times when we will be glad of that reversed power dynamic. But does it really take us to a place where we want to go? Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, please share with anyone else you think would also enjoy it. Word of mouth is really important to us. And if you've not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? As the saying goes, that subscribe button won't smash itself.